Audio sermons from Peachtree Christian Church.
Today's reading is from the book of Mark, chapter 5, verses 21 through 43. When Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered around him, and he was by the sea. Then one of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and pleaded with him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her, so that she may be made well and live." So he went with him, and a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from a flow of blood for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus and came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his cloak, I will be made well." Immediately, her flow of blood stopped, and she felt in her body that she was healed of her disease. Immediately aware that power had gone forth from him, Jesus turned about in the crowd and said, "Who touched my cloak?" And his disciples said to him, "You see the crowd pressing in on you. How can you say, 'Who touched me?'" He looked all around to see who had done it. But the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came in fear and trembling, fell down before him, and told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your disease." While he was still speaking, some people came from the synagogue leader's house to say, "Your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further?" But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the synagogue leader, "Do not be afraid, only believe." He allowed no one to follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the synagogue leader's house, he saw a commotion, people weeping and wailing loudly. When he entered, he said to them, "Why do you make a commotion and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him. Then he put them all outside and took the child's father and mother and those who were with him and went in where the child was. Taking her by the hand, he said to her, "Talitha cumi," which means, "Little girl, get up." And immediately the girl stood up and began to walk about. She was 12 years of age. At this they were overcome with amazement. He strictly ordered them that no one should know this, and told them to give her something to eat. The word of the Lord. Please be seated.
Please recover. I'm sorry. I know it's a very long text. It's 2 pages. I know we're all thinking, at least I was thinking when I read that this week, all right, long text, short sermon, long text, short sermon. We're all hoping for it. You don't have to lie. It's a safe place. This is church. Well, preaching miracle stories can be a funny thing sometimes, because there's certain miracle stories that everyone's okay with. You know, we love the calming of the storm, the feeding of the 5,000. Like those stories, I think, they don't touch us too much. They're just like, oh, God's amazing. Look at these powers. That's awesome. Weather. Wow. But most of us, have had it more than enough to eat for most of our lives. So like the feeding of the 5,000 just might not touch us the same. But healing stories, those can get a little too close to home sometimes. So maybe you're like me. And I grew up in church. If we weren't comfortable with the healing stories, we just focused on where Jesus says, your faith has saved you. Here it says made well, but it's the same word. We translate it, depending on if it's about your spirit or about your body, we translate it one way or the other. But we'll talk about Jesus saved you. And we'll look at baptisms and how many people got saved that year and our new members. Because saved is really the ultimate healing, right? That's the safe way to handle it. Or I was listening to a sermon this week. It talked about, it had a great line. First time I heard it, it said, miracles aren't the point. They just affirm the message. I was like, oh, that's good. Like, when the person wrote that, like came up with that, they're going to write it down. That's going to be a note right there. Nailed it. And there's some truth to that. Because if you look at this row of miracle stories we're in, we have Jesus has just calmed the storm and showed his power over nature. And then he went across the sea and he healed a man that had been possessed by a demon, showing his power over Satan, over the spiritual realm. And he's come back and now he heals a woman and raises a little girl from the dead. And that's supposed to show us something about Jesus, more than just the miracles. Actually, it's supposed to show us, for the readers during that time, if they heard this story about Jesus, they go, wait, that sounds familiar. I've heard that before. Elijah and Elisha each did this. They raised a child from the dead, and that their cloak or their garments had healed people. So it makes sense. And additionally, these are in a row of stories that are about faith. Jesus, during the calming of the storm, tells his disciples, do you still not believe? In this story, he talks about how their faith has made them well. Your faith has healed you. And in the story that follows this, Jesus goes to Nazareth, his hometown, and they're all like, wow, he's really good at speaking, and he's doing miracles. That's amazing. I wonder how he does it. And Jesus has this line that is one of just like no one wants that. It says that Jesus was amazed at their lack of faith, and he wasn't able to do much. He could just heal a few people. These stories are about how faith interacts with the power of God. But that feels just a little too convenient of a truth, right? During our skeptical age, our age of disbelief, the fact that it's like, well, we don't have to worry about the miracles. We don't have to worry about the supernatural. That would be a little too much. But in this era of disbelief and skepticism, of misinformation, of algorithms and AI-generated fakes, and short attention spans to boot, what do we do with this? Well, we're at a time where we can't believe and shouldn't believe most of what we see or hear, especially online. Everything seems curated for us. Take the presidential debate. If you watched it, I'm sorry. Our country is at a low point. We're working on it. If you didn't watch it, you've still most likely seen videos or a picture from it. And it either puts a candidate that you already like into a positive light, if that's possible after that debate, or more likely, it puts the candidate that you don't like in a negative light because you agree with that. And all of our activity online points us to this. And so now, while everything is partial videos or edited or cut, we have trained ourselves never to trust anything, unless, of course, it already fits that narrative that we kind of believe. And then, on top of that, I make you read this long passage. You were standing for like 3 minutes. You're like, is this the gym or church? And at a time when 30-second videos are king, a 22-verse passage feels like an eternity. Am I right? You were standing a long time. And even with the exceptional reading of Steve Oliver, yes, it was amazing. We can still miss so much that's in this. the life, the reality of the story can pass us by. So, I'm going to ask you to indulge me as I tell you the story again. Jesus has just come across the water. He's just returned from healing a demoniac, and they could tell beforehand. They knew what boat Jesus was, and the crowds have already started to gather. And there's a father at the front of the crowd. He happens to also be a leader in the synagogue, an elder. But in this story, he is a desperate father. As Jesus lands, he comes forward. And if you've ever had anyone in your family who is sick or dying, and you have come to that point where you are begging God to do anything at all, you can feel everything. Just your neck gets tense. Every muscle is tensed as you beg God to move this giant boulder in front of you that you can't, which is the health of the person that you love. And you are giving everything. And this man comes forward, and we read it. He begged repeatedly, and then Steve did an excellent job. But you still can't hear that over and over again. My daughter, I know you're a man of God. My daughter, please, for the love of you, my daughter, please heal her. I need you to heal her. My only daughter, please. That begging, the agony of grief. And Jesus says yes. And there's that slight release. And that, okay, we can do something. We're going to do something. Great. Let's start moving. And so they start to walk. And the crowd is gathering in on them. And pressing through, you can see him. He's right next to Jesus. He's like, it's this way. It's this way. It's this way. And the crowd is pressing up on Jesus. Like if you've ever been here for a Christmas service and you can't not touch someone. Or you've seen some great athlete who's having to get escorted out after winning the championship. The crowd is crowding in. And off over here, there's a woman. She's got a veil over her head. She's got her head down so people don't recognize her, because she shouldn't even be this close really without telling people, because she's ceremoniously unclean. And she just knows in her heart that if I just touch Jesus, if I just touch his cloak, I'll be better. I'll be better. I know it. I know it. And as they're moving forward, and the crowd is following Jesus and just packing in more and more, she knows it's now or never. And she starts to go. And as she goes, each person she bumps, it's painful. Not because it hurts her, but because of the guilt and shame that she's feeling, because she knows every time she bumps one of these people, they are ceremoniously unclean like her. They are ritually unclean. They have to go into the temple and offer a sacrifice so that they can be part of the community again. And she knows, she feels it, she hates it. But she knows she has to get to Jesus. And as she does, she reaches down, touches his coat, and stops. She feels it right then. The closest thing I can think of really fast that many of us might have experienced is if you go to the chiropractor and you get that first fresh healing, and you're like, oh, wow, I haven't stood up straight in years feeling. But that just overwhelming sense of relief. And she stands up as the crowd continues to lean forward and push in. And Jesus takes half a step more and stops. And as he stops, so does the crowd, and she blends back in. And he begins to look around. And Jairus is losing his mind. Why are we stopping? Why are we stopping? How can you stop right now? And Jesus says, who touched me? And the disciples, for possibly the only time in all the Gospels, say something intelligent. What are you talking about? Everyone has touched you. You are like Michael Jackson right now, all right? Everyone has touched you. What do you mean someone touched you? And he just ignores them like he tends to do. And he's like, no, someone touched me. Just trust me for once. All right? And he's looking around and he's looking for her. And she knows. She knows it's her. She hears him finally as she comes back to reality of just feeling freedom. And she steps in and she goes, it was me. And at that point, they see who it is. And it was like coughing without a mask during COVID. Boom! People just spread out. and they make room. As this woman who they know is supposed to be unclean, and they're thinking, I hope she didn't touch me. I really hope she didn't touch me. I don't want to have to go through it. If you've ever read Leviticus, you don't want to go through it. It takes forever. It's a pain. All right? She's right there. And she tells the whole truth, because when you've experienced that freedom and trust and salvation, if you will, or healing from God, you're willing to share the dirty, dark parts because you know that the truth has already come and you're happy. And she shares it, and Jesus is sitting there, and he tells her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Repeating the begging of the father, Jairus, earlier. Your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Go in peace. Don't feel the shame. It's over. You did good. She knows that what she did was wrong because she was getting people ceremonially unclean, and he says, that's okay. You were coming here for me, and I understand. Go. You're free. And Jairus is sitting there like, that's great. I need that. And at the same time, someone comes to him, and the dreaded news has arrived. Your daughter's dead. And if you think later Jesus talks about how she's not dead, just think about how certain you have to be to go to a father and tell him, don't bring the doctor anymore. Don't bring the help. It's hopeless. She's dead. They're certain she's dead. And Jesus overhears it. And the fun thing about that word is the word overhear also means ignore. So Jesus overhears it and ignores it. And he just turns to me and says, just believe I'm still coming. And just an ounce of hope after having just felt overwhelmed and done and barely standing, comes back into Jairus, and they keep going. And Jesus comes to the house, and he gets there. And as Eugene Peterson puts it in the message, they've already brought out the casseroles, all right? The meal train has been set up. This little girl is dead, and everybody's gone home. They made some food. They're like, here, I'm so sorry. Let's sit. Let's talk. If you've ever been a part of that, you know. And Jesus comes in and says, why are you guys acting like this? She's just sleeping. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where everyone else seems to know what the reality is, and there's this one person who keeps not getting it and throwing out bad ideas, and you're really uncomfortable, and you're like, that won't work. Like this, you clearly don't understand what's happening right now. Please stop. I'd rather you not. And you have that little laughter, that uncomfortable laughter that comes from not knowing what to do, because this person's not listening to reason. This person is clearly in over their head. That uncomfortable laughter, they kind of sit in. Jesus kicks them out. He's left the other disciples kind of hold back the crowd. He's brought 3 with him, and then Jairus and his wife go in to this room. And he comes up to the girl and he says, Talith cum, which is always fun because the whole Bible, I don't know if you know this. This wasn't written in English. Surprise! It was all translated. So let's leave these untranslated words and figure it out, right? Why? So smart people are always like, oh, well, maybe it was to make it feel like abracadabra. You know, it's magical words that made it happen. And then like a paragraph later, like, but it's not because it's Jesus. And I'm like, you guys just had to fill paper, don't you? You know, if it's not long enough, people won't buy it. But it's this like sense of, they don't fully get it yet, but it's still, they know it's the power of God. And so Jesus says, little girl, get up. And she gets up. And they have the same reaction that the woman who was healed do. They awe. For her, it was fear and trembling, but that just translates to awe. I believed that this person had the power of God to do something, but now I know this person had the power of God to do something, and I have to live with that now. This knowledge changes me. And then he says, my favorite verse, get her something to eat. What a fun verse to add at the end. Okay, I guess dying takes a lot out of people. Like, she had already proven that she's alive. She had gotten up and walked around. But he cares about her more than just being saved. She needs some food. Much like that woman earlier had already been saved, but she needed to be welcomed in to the community. And so, as we've heard the story now twice, I wonder if now when you hear it, you can hear it and feel it as one of those in desperate need of a miracle. And if you can you imagine someone saying, the miracles aren't the point, they only affirm the message? The miracles, sure as hell, were the point for Jairus and his wife and his daughter, and for this woman who had suffered for 12 years and been ostracized from her community, unable to worship, unable to be part of normal life, giving up all of her money just to try to be back part of it, and only to get worse. And they didn't even really get who Jesus was. Like, is that not blow your mind? Like, we aren't even halfway through the Gospel of Mark yet. They don't get that he's the Messiah. We have the privilege of having read the whole story. We know that Jesus is the Messiah, that he's died for us, that our hope is to be found in Jesus. Yet, is our faith even close to theirs? Maybe it's because our desperation isn't at times. They just knew that Jesus was empowered by God and they needed it. And sometimes that can be enough. So, for some of us, we can't fall back on that. I just don't feel like I know enough to do something. I don't know enough to participate sometimes. None of us has this completely right. But we, like Jairus and this woman, are in desperation. We are in need of God. And once we look to Jesus as our hope from God, we are brought into the body of Christ. And we are to live into that faith, which is a faith in action. And we are to take time to remember it every week, which we do. This communion is where we live between that desperation and that invitation into the body of Christ. Because we are no longer just the hopeless in need of help. We are part of the body of Christ that, like Jesus, looks out for others. We are to be part of the movement that is the church, that are the disciples of Christ. We are called to take time to be interruptible, as Jesus does, to look around, to find others, to welcome them into this movement of the desperate. And if you're trying to think of ways to do this, if you want an exercise that I had to do one time, which was wildly uncomfortable, but fun, it wasn't fun. When I was a senior in college and a student who attended Georgia Tech Christian Campus Fellowship, we had an exercise that we were asked to do if we were in leadership. And you had one day where you had to spend the whole day without ending a conversation. If you ever tried it, you can end up talking to some people you weren't planning to talk to for a really long time. And it can throw off your day. But that practice of being interruptible and of being a part of another person can lead to something that you weren't expecting. And things will happen. Miracles will happen because you never know what will be a miracle to someone else. But if you take the time to be interruptible, you just might be part of it. And that can start here on Sunday morning. As you get in and you look around and you see your friends and you see your family and you see that person who's definitely probably been here probably 10, 15 times, maybe 5 years. I don't know, but I never remember their name. It's okay to live in that awkwardness of asking people's names and to welcome them and to look for a way to draw them in to this group this body of Christ. Everywhere we are, whether we are here, whether we are at work, in traffic, you can let people in. I know it hurts, but that's your cross to bear as a Christian. All right? It's the simplest one. Just let people in. But at a bar, I don't care where you are. We as Christians need to practice being interruptible to show compassion and love to others. And what stood out to me most, as I said earlier, is when Jesus says, give her some food. He cared for her so differently than we expect, so differently than we like to feel sometimes. That just, let's get them saved and then they'll be good and we'll leave them alone. But he cared about her needs. Maybe we could mirror this and when we're being compassionate. Maybe if you come on Mondays when we serve breakfast to our unhoused friends and neighbors, it's not just about serving them food, but you can sit with them and get to know them and listen to them as equals, or as if they are Jesus, or if they're the most interesting person in the world, because that can be just as life-giving as a casserole or a bowl of fruit. And if there's some uncomfortable moments, which there will be, or laughter at times, don't worry. Remember that when there's uncomfortable laughter and we are willing to remain in it, that is Jesus still working in the moment. And as we float between the desperate and the body of Christ, let us live out our faith in our welcome and our compassion to others, just as we received that care and love of God for us, ourselves, and our whole person.